What's the story, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen? The All-Ireland Senior Football Championship commences this weekend. We have a whole host of games, obviously, this weekend, but as we very well know, I previewed those games yesterday. So here we are to preview the entirety of the All-Ireland Senior Football Championship. We're going to be running through every provincial championship, all four provincial championships. I also did a mock draw as well for the group stages. So a little bit different this time around. We're, I suppose, going to be doing a bit of a mock draw and then obviously picking our All-Ireland winners off that. And we're also going to be doing this predictions video live as well for a change. Normally, I pre-record these predictions videos, but this time around, we are doing it live. And yeah, we're also going to be looking at the Young Footballer of the Year, the Footballer of the Year, the underachievers, the overachievers, and much more as well. So if you enjoy the content, hit the like button and subscribe, and let's get into it. So yeah, let's get straight into it then. We'll start off by looking at this weekend's looking at the provincial championships. Now, of course, as we very well know, the championship structure is that little bit different this year. And do you know what? Maybe we might just run through that first a little bit briefly before we look into the provincial championships. So as we know, the group stages are obviously coming in this year. I'm still not entirely convinced by the group stages, to be honest with you. I think it would have been a lot better to have the top two sides from the group stages go through rather than three teams. I think it makes a mockery of the group stages in some ways, but it does add for a bit more excitement. And when you see the mock draw that I came up with, that I just done online, you'll actually see some potential interesting games that might happen, and maybe it might be a little bit more interesting when the time comes around. But running through the provincial championships this year, they don't have the same weight as previous years. Normally what would happen is the provincial winners would go straight through to the All-Ireland quarterfinals and would be seeded away from the other provincial winners, essentially. This time around, it's a little bit different. The only thing the provincial winners get is they go into pot one in the group stages, which means obviously they avoid the other provincial winners in the group stages, essentially. But it doesn't guarantee them an All-Ireland quarterfinal. And we could even have a, bizarre scenario where certain provincial winners don't even get out of group stages or then go through the qualifiers. It's a little bit different this year, a little bit stranger than usual. So all of the provincial winners go into pot one. The provincial losers will go into pot two. And then it's basically the next four best teams from the National Football League according to the rankings. And then pot four is obviously the lowest four sides out of the National Football League rankings, including Westmeath as well, who won the Tailteann Cup last year, and they have guaranteed themselves a All-Ireland Senior Football Championship place. Now, there could be a scenario where a team like Clare, for example, beats Cork this weekend and goes to a provincial final, and that would mean that Meath, who are actually the lowest ranked side of all the Sam Maguire teams that obviously qualified via the National Football League, they would miss out, because if you get to a provincial final, regardless of where you finished in the National Football League, you will go straight through to the All-Ireland Senior Football Championship. So hopefully that explains it. I'll try to explain it a little bit more maybe when we get to the group stages as well. And we'll remind ourselves of what teams are in certain pots. And obviously with the draw, as I said, when we have a look, it is a fake draw. It's something I created online. I did initially actually pre-record this video, but I just didn't have time to edit it. So instead, we're going to use a couple of graphics to show the draw, and then we'll go to there. But anyway, well, I know there's plenty of comments flowing in, so we will get through those comments at the end of the video. So much appreciated. But as we can see here, we have the provincial championships. And Of course, I did do a preview yesterday with Dara O'Connor from the Sideline View, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about these individual games. But in terms of the Connacht Senior Football Championship, if we have a look at the quarterfinals, we can see here London versus Sligo, New York versus Leitrim, and of course the big one, Mayo versus Roscommon in Castlebar. I think Sligo should be beating London. Let's be perfectly honest. I think London have a couple of injuries in there. I think Enda Lynn, I think a former Derry footballer, from what I've heard, he's been injured the last couple of weeks and hasn't been available for London, and a couple of other key players who were pivotal last year in London's rise in the league. I think Sligo should just have the better of them. They should have the better of them. The only thing that could go against Sligo maybe is the fact that they played last week, and it's another game. It's a trip over to London, but I would say Sligo by 7 or 8 points, in my opinion. New York versus Leitrim is an interesting one because I've actually seen the New York side. Former Galway footballer Adrian Vardy's in there. Johnny McGeaney, the current manager. And you remember New York actually nearly beat Sligo last year. There wasn't too much between those sides. They have the likes of Bill Maher in there, former Tipperary footballer. Gavin O'Brien as well, who once played for Kerry. So they have a couple of talented players, but in my opinion, I'd fancy Leitrim. I think Leitrim surely should have enough. It is quite a trip over to New York, and maybe a bit of jet lag and everything else. Playing on a 4G pitch might go against them, but I will go for Leitrim by the smallest of margins. But look, New York are coming pretty good, and it's not inconceivable that they win this game. That is all I am saying. Mayo versus Roscommon, of course, is the other big one, or the big one, you should say. As I was saying yesterday to Dara, I do fancy Mayo. I just think they're a bit too strong, a bit too far ahead, a bit more athletic than this Roscommon side at this moment in time. I think they've far more ways they can hurt Roscommon as opposed to Roscommon can hurt Mayo. And you look at Mayo, and they've got some serious players all across the board. And even if things aren't going right, like they'll probably start with a full forward line: Ryan O'Donoghue, Tommy Conroy, Aidan O'Shea. And Aidan O'Shea might drift a little bit. But even if things aren't going right, you've got Cillian O'Connor. He might not be fit, but he's a possible option from the bench. You've got the likes, of Kevin McLaughlin, who could come off the bench, Aidan Orms on the bench. And they have so many options, like all across the board in terms of their attack. And that's why I would fancy Mayo to get the better of Roscommon. Now, in fairness to Roscommon, they've come very good. And you'll see when we get through to the group stages and everything else that I think Roscommon, for me, will certainly be a difficult team to beat, in my opinion. And it's by no means feat that Mayo win this. I think this could be, neck and neck, possibly extra time, but I'd fancy Mayo to make the breakthrough. Cracking on with the semi-finals then. Well, according to my predictions, it will be Sligo versus Leitrim and Mayo versus Galway. I'm actually going to go for Leitrim to get the better of Sligo, in my opinion, because I think Leitrim have, I think when you look at the meetings between these two in the last couple of seasons, there hasn't been much between them. And I think Leitrim maybe have got a little bit of bad luck at times against Sligo. You think last year of the square ball goal that was wrongly ruled out. And you think of the game in the league towards the end where Andy Moran felt like there should have been more time added on. I just think Leitrim are going to have the bit between their teeth. And for Sligo, they've played a lot of games consistently. There might be a bit of a break between the quarterfinals and the semi-finals, maybe a 2-week break. But generally, I just fancy Leitrim. I think Keith Byrne, phenomenal footballer. Tom Pryor's looked very good. And to be fair, I don't think there'll be much between them. I think maybe a point or 2 points. That's generally how it's been between these two. They actually went to penalties, if you remember, when they played in the Tailteann Cup. So there's really not much between these two. But I just fancy Leitrim to get to their first Connacht final since 2000, which would be an extraordinary achievement. Obviously, I don't fancy them to win the game. I think it'll be a fairly one-sided Connacht final, but I do fancy them to get the better of Sligo. Mayo Galway is an extremely hard one to call because it is two of the best teams in the country, in my opinion. And I think Galway, Galway's a hard one to judge at times because they've had a couple of injuries this year with Damien Comer. We've seen Finnerty go off injured. Johnny Heaney obviously got injured during that league final. Peter Cook, since coming back into the side, has looked very, very good. And there's a lot good about Galway at the minute. And they look more of a seasoned team rather than an up-and-coming team, which is what they looked like last year. Mayo, though, like it's a hard one to call when you look at this, and maybe we'll know this a bit more when the time comes. And obviously with these predictions, a lot of the time it's just a bit of fun. Don't take it too seriously, because obviously when the games come around, we'll certainly know a lot more then. But I do like making these predictions videos because it's good to actually predict what's going to happen, and then you look back at it at the end of the year and see where you went wrong, which has often been the case for myself. But I'm going to back Mayo by the smallest of margins. I think I think Galway. I just think Mayo haven't beaten them now in the league. When you look at the meetings between these two as well, like I know Galway beat Mayo last year. Mayo in the last 6 or 7 meetings have generally got the better of Galway. And I think they'll narrowly have enough to come through. I just think Kevin McStay's man management, tactically as well, I think they'll just about have enough to squeeze through Galway. But again, it's a game that could very well go either way. And I think, it goes without saying that the winner of the Connacht Championship will come from this game. It is the two best teams, as I said, in this province, two of the best teams in the country as well. So yeah, fancy Mayo to come through Galway, and I think they'll beat Leitrim by, probably 15 points, 10, 15 points. That's the negative side from a Leitrim perspective. And I'd be interested to know for any Leitrim or Sligo fans who are watching, whether they're watching live or watching after the fact, you get through to a Connacht final, but then you're probably going to get hammered by Mayo or Galway, depending on who it is, or maybe even Roscommon, who knows. And then in the group stages as well, you're probably not going to win a game. So it's not going to be that fun supporting your side, but at the same time, you get a provincial final, and it is great exposure for the supporters and obviously for the players as well. So yeah, that's my take. That's my take on Mayo. Yeah, plenty of comments. Dara says you really have to question yourselves. Leitrim have only gone backwards since 2018, 2019. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I think obviously in the end of the previous manager, I can't remember his name off the top of my head now. But I do remember, obviously they went up to Division 3 and there was a good few players there, bit of regression, but I still think Leitrim have good enough players. And I think they've been a little bit unlucky, to be honest with you. I think they've been a little bit unlucky in not getting through to Division 4. Tom says, and the Lynn is starting for London. Interesting enough, I suppose. If Meath and Clare make provincial final, do Kildare miss out, says Porrick? I don't think so, no, because Meath have already got a Sam Magor place, provided no one else gets to a provincial final that ranked below them in the league. So it wouldn't really change that. But if Clare were to make a provincial final, then and Meath weren't, then obviously Meath would not be there. But if there was a scenario where Clare and let's say Fermanagh, just off the top of my head, probably not going to happen. Let's say Clare and Fermanagh make a provincial final. That would mean then Kildare would miss out because they finished 5th in the league. So hopefully that clears things up. But yeah, I suppose we'll crack on then with the next provincial championship, which is Leinster. I've seen someone asking me there, do I rate Wicklow? I certainly do, and I would fancy them to beat Carlow this weekend. I think Kevin Quinn, Owen Darcy, two very young players there. I think Ushie McConville has definitely got, a rise from these Wicklow lads. And, from looking at them at underage level as well, the last couple of years, I think they do have a good couple of players there. So you'd fancy them to beat Carlow. Interesting enough, though, these two did draw against each other in the league earlier in the year. So that might give Carlow a little bit of confidence, but I would certainly fancy Wicklow to come through there. And Wexford versus Laois. It's an interesting one, this one, because Dublin have played Wexford in Wexford Park the last 2 years. So I think as a Dublin fan, and I'd say even Wexford fans as well, to see the same game again, which is probably going to be the same outcome. I know one of those games that was Wexford actually played quite well, in fairness, in 2021, but I just don't think the supporters of either side really want to see that game. And it's a hard one to know because Wexford have this habit of pulling out the odd championship win here or there. Ben Brosnan tends to shoot the lights out. When they beat Offaly last year, for example. But I'm going to go with Laois. I think Laois have been a bit more consistent in the division, in Division 4. Paul Kingston back in the side. Evan O'Carroll as well. So I'll go with Laois. To get the win there. And Longford versus Offaly, as I was saying yesterday in the preview show, fancy Offaly to make the breakthrough there. I think just not quite clicked into gear for Paddy Christie just yet. But what you would say, actually, Offaly only beat Longford by a point in the league earlier in the season. So in fairness, Longford maybe just have a slight chance. Going into the quarterfinals then, that would leave Offaly versus Meath, according to my prediction. Do you know what the thing is? I was almost thinking that Offaly could actually win this game. And I strongly believe they have a serious chance. Meath haven't won in their last 5 matches in the league. It's hard to know really if things are working under Colm O'Rourke for Meath this year, to be honest. Like, I look at them and think tactically they don't really have much about them. They seem to be kicking the ball long too much, playing risky balls, losing possession, overly reliant on goals. And they don't seem to have many great forwards. Like, hearing rumours that Jordan Morris is no longer in the panel. I think Shane Walsh is still injured as well. Meath's own Shane Walsh. So, Jack O'Connor, who looked very good last year, I haven't seen much of him this year, to be honest with you. So it's hard to really know what level Meath are at. I mean, I've seen their under-20s got beat by Laois, a couple of days ago as well. So it's not looking too good for Meath at the minute. But their strength is goals, in fairness. And I think they probably would have enough to open Offaly's defence up. And Offaly, obviously, have a lot of younger players, probably hasn't quite, they're just trying to put the pieces of the jigsaw together. And Offaly, from that under-20 side a couple of years ago. And it remains to be seen if those players can make the step up. But I'd go with Meath. I think goals will win them the game. I could see them scoring 3 or 4 goals, in fairness. And I think the fact they haven't won in the last 5 games, I think for Meath football, for the pride of Meath football, surely they win. Because if they don't, I mean, that's 6 games without a win. And they're probably still going to the Sam Maguire anyways, but it will be looking pretty grim from a Meath perspective. But I'm going to give them the edge over Offaly. Westmeath Louth. Do you know what? This is a banana skin type game for Louth in many ways, because it's interesting looking at this. At the start of the season, I think most people would predict Westmeath to win this and probably go on and reach a Leinster final. But Louth's season has been extraordinary. Finishing third, obviously, in Division 2. Getting so close to getting promoted, beating the likes of Meath and Kildare. And even, you think towards the end of the league, that Samuel Roy injured. You've got young Darren McConnell come in, who's looked brilliant. Kieran Grimes, or Kieran Byrne, Connor Grimes, I should say, mixing them up. Those 2 players have looked brilliant as well. And Louth just seem to have a real togetherness about them. And for Westmeath, I've been disappointed with Westmeath. I think I've said on this channel before, family from Westmeath, always rooting for Westmeath to do well. And it just hasn't worked. 4th in the division, in Division 3. They actually had the best attack and the best defence in Division 3, which is quite bizarre for a team that didn't get promoted. And it's hard to know, under Desi Dolan. I haven't seen enough of Westmeath, to be honest with you, to say where it's gone wrong. But the fact they won the Tailteann Cup last year, I think we were all expecting them to kick on. And when you match both of these 2 sides up, you look at Westmeath and they probably have better players than Ronan O'Toole, Ray Kennellan, Sam McCartan, John Heslin. But Louth have more of a togetherness under Mickey Hart. And that's why I think I'll back them. I'm actually not too sure where this game is. Does it say here? I don't think it says it here. Maybe it's in Cusack Park. I'm not entirely sure. But I'll go with Louth to win the game by the smallest margins. Wicklow versus Kildare. Bit of a banana skin for Kildare. I mean, Kildare haven't looked great this year, but the fact they won their last 2 games against Limerick and Meath, albeit Limerick were one of the were the worst team in Division 2, you would say, and Meath, to be fair, have been on a massive slide towards the end of their division campaign. But at the same time, Kildare haven't looked excellent this year, and Wicklow could frustrate Kildare. But I think surely Kildare will have enough. It can be weird in the Leinster Championship at times, because I do remember Kildare losing to Carlow a couple of years ago. Could you see something similar happen here? Would be, probably one of the greatest wins in Wicklow GA history if they were to pull it off. But I'd go with Kildare. I think Kildare, it hasn't looked right this year, but they still have good players. Jimmy Hyland, Daniel Flynn, Jack Robinson, who looked very good against Dublin early on. So I'll go with Kildare, I think. By the smallest of margins. And Dublin versus Laois, goes without saying. We'll obviously discuss Dublin a little bit further on. And I think it goes without saying, obviously, that I do predict Dublin to win this championship. You know, I don't think that's a crazy prediction or anything. I think them versus Kildare, like, yeah, you'd fancy Dublin all day long. I don't think Kildare are good enough to beat Dublin or even challenge them. They looked like a stage last year where maybe they were closing the gap, but this year they've massively regressed. And although Dublin at times haven't looked great either, and Kildare will take positives from the fact that they came close to beating Dublin in Croke Park earlier in the year in the league, but I'll go with Dublin to reach the Leinster final. That would set up Meath versus Louth in the semi-finals, the other semi-final, according to my prediction. I'd go with Louth. I'd go with Louth to turn over Meath. Maybe Sam Roy will be back from injury at this point. I'm not entirely sure. But I just think Louth, like if Louth can get through Westmeath, I think they can get through Meath. And, you know, maybe revenge for 2010. I'm not entirely sure. That, you know, you'd have to give them the Leinster title, wouldn't you, to be honest with you, for them to say it'd be revenge. But I fancy them to turn over Meath. I do. I just don't think all is right with Meath at this moment in time. And, you know, as I said, they could easily get beat by Offaly as well. They really, really could. But we'll go with Louth to reach the Leinster final. Dublin versus Louth. Louth's first Leinster final since 2010. But I think Dublin, all in all, fairly comfortably will win the Leinster final. And I actually think it'll probably be more comfortable than what it was in that league game as well. You know, at this point, Paul Mannion would have played, you know, a couple of games. Hopefully he'll be more integrated into the squad. Jack McCaffrey, who knows? Maybe even Cluxton might get a run out away to Laois or something like that. Probably not, but yeah, I think Dublin would be far too strong for Louth in that Leinster final. Fionn says, who do you think are Dublin's closest contenders for Leinster? I think Louth at this moment in time on the basis of the league. What I would say actually is if Westmeath get through Louth, I do think Westmeath will beat Meath as well. If Wicklow get provincial final, do Kildare miss out? I think it would depend on the other side of the draw, basically. It would actually be Meath that would miss out, depending on if they don't get to a provincial final. Tom says Leitrim in a lot better place since Andy's come on board. Only just missed out on promotion in relation to an earlier prediction. Obviously, you're looking at the Connacht Championship. Jack says Longford have lost David McGivney, Rion Brady, and others. Yeah, you know, definitely not having those players, I think, is a big loss. And Jack says Offaly should win in regards to the Meath game. Yeah, I definitely would give Offaly a serious chance. I really would, in fairness. But I think goals is Meath's strength, and I think that could be what gets them out of jail. Like I could see them winning the game 4 goals and 9 points or something like that, and Offaly score 115 or something like that. I just fancy Offaly or Meath to win the game on the basis of goals. But yeah, moving on to Munster, I think this one is very self-explanatory as well. I think we all know Kerry will win this, but we'll run through it quickly. As I was saying yesterday, fancy Cork to be Clare. Think it could be a close game. It is in Ennis as well. And maybe Clare might be able to pull off the shock, but I would go with Cork to get the victory. And Tipperary versus Waterford, I think Tipperary should have enough there. Albeit, there's probably not a million miles between these two sides. And Tipperary, to be fair, with injuries and everything else, are probably nearly around Waterford's level now, if we're actually being honest. But with it being in Thurles, with Tipperary having played at a higher level, I'd fancy them to beat Waterford. Tipperary versus Kerry. It's mad that we even have these games still in the championship, but there's probably no real solution here. You can't, could you give Kerry an automatic place in the Munster final? Maybe you could, but then at the same time, you're ruining the opportunity for other counties, which the opportunity isn't really there, but at the same time, what can you do? You can't change certain championships, so it is what it is. But yeah, Kerry to, breeze past Tipperary, 15, 20 points, could even be more. And I fancy Cork to get the better of Limerick as well, who, in fairness, just haven't looked all that right in Division 2 this year. Change of management, obviously, as well. But I'd fancy Cork to make the breakthrough there. And Cork versus Kerry in the Munster final. Do you know what? I'd be interested to see Cork's approach to that game, because if Cork can get at Kerry and get after them early on, I'm actually not too sure where that game would be played. I think it was in Fitzgerald Stadium, Killarney, if Cork versus Kerry. So yeah, because it was in Parky Rin last year, wasn't it? So it'll be in Kerry this year. Look, if Cork get after Kerry, they might be able to ruffle their feathers a little bit. You know, when they went after Dublin, they caused a couple of issues, and Kerry's defence hasn't been perfect this year. But I do think, all in all, like Kerry should have way too much for Cork and probably run out seven or 8 point winners, if we're being honest. But you know, I hope Cork don't play the way they played against Kerry last year and sort of have a consolidation type performance where they're happy to lose by 6 or 7 and not get battered. I would like to see Cork really get after Kerry, because I do think there's vulnerabilities in Kerry's defence. But like, all in all, you'd still fancy Kerry to come through, most certainly. The Ulster Championship, this is definitely where it is at. Make no mistake about that. Preliminary round is obviously this weekend. Armagh versus Antrim. Armagh surely should be too strong to be Antrim. Seen obviously the team news, and I think Aidan Nugent is on the bench. I think Stephen Campbell isn't playing. Rian O'Neill isn't in the panel. But all in all, Armagh should get the better of Antrim. And looking at the quarterfinals, them versus Cavan. Do you know what? Cavan have a serious shout of beating Armagh. You know, both of these two sides will be in the same division next year as well. Like, let's not forget that. So, like, yeah, I would give Cavan a serious chance. I think Padraig Faulkner is one of the best defenders in the country at times. You know, certainly in Ulster. You've seen the job he done on Ulton Kelm in the Division 3 final, and even how brilliant he was back when Cavan won the Ulster final a couple of years ago. But I think Armagh, like, they do still have great players. Like, maybe if they don't have Rian O'Neill, like, they have a great young player in Keema Conville who can't seem to really get much game time. Ross McQuillan, Conor Turba. I still think they have a good enough squad to beat Cavan, in my opinion. It will be close, though. And if Cavan won that game, I wouldn't be at all surprised, because Cavan have actually beat Armagh, I think, in the last few times they've played them in the championship as well. So, you know, it's not inconceivable that Cavan don't win that game. But I'll go with Armagh just by the smallest of margins. Down versus Donegal is an interesting one. Certainly at the start of the year, I think most people would pick Donegal. And, yeah, you know, Donegal are just an absolute ruins at the minute, aren't they? Like, even after Paddy Carr leaves and Aidan O'Rourke comes in, you're expecting a managerial bounce, and they didn't get that. They did not get that versus Roscommon. Obviously, Ryan McHugh now has made himself unavailable for Donegal. You know, just all the murmurings of things not being good in Donegal. Like, I don't understand why they didn't, you know, bring in Carl Lacey just till the end of the season, or even Michael Murphy. Like, you know, the players will respect them, you know, either of them two. You know, the players will work for them, and there'll be a bit of a bounce. It mightn't be the long-term project, but just for the end of the season, give it to them. But for whatever reason, that hasn't happened. They've gone with Aidan O'Rourke, who was already part of Paddy Carr's management team anyway, which wasn't working. So it was a little bit strange. But look, down. You know, I fancy Down to beat them. I really do. Just looking at it, where's this game being played? Being played in Newry as well. You know, Conor Lafferty's got the Kilcoo lads on board. Micheál Rooney, Eugene Brannigan lined out the last day as well. So I fancy Down to turn over Donegal. Is it that big of a shock? Probably not. It certainly, if you predicted that a year ago, I think, you know, people would have thought you're mad. But I don't think there's that much of a difference between these two, in my opinion. Looking at the other side of the draw, and this is where things get very, very interesting indeed. Fermanagh versus Derry. Derry should be too strong for Fermanagh. Was disappointed with how Fermanagh played in Croke Park versus Cavan. They didn't really offer much. But I think they've, you know, found a good few players this year. Darragh McGurns come on leaps and bounds. Ulton Kelm looks very good. Young Sean McNally between the sticks as well was very impressive, in fairness, the last day. Made a couple of big saves. So, yeah, we'll go with Derry. And we'll obviously discuss them a little bit more so in a couple of minutes' time. Tyrone versus Monaghan, two rivals, two close teams, but I would give Tyrone the backing there. I think Tyrone have turned the corner now under their management after a bit of a turbulent year last year and a turbulent start to the year, and you never quite know what's around the corner with Tyrone. They've bags of talent, bags of ability. I think their squad isn't brilliant, and that might cost them further down the line. I don't know if they have the options coming off the bench that Dublin, Mayo, and Kerry have. But I still think from 1 to 15, they've some of the best players in the country. Noel Morgan, phenomenal goalkeeper. Padraig Hampsey, Ronan McNamee, Peter Hart, in at wing back is phenomenal. Midfield, solid with the likes of Con Kilpatrick in there. Brian Kennedy as well. And then, forwards, like outside of Darren McCurry, they don't probably have too many marquee forwards that could, drag you over the line in big games. But Derek Hannivan's come on really well. He's looked really good this year. Still waiting to see. We haven't seen the best of Cathal McShane probably since his injury. And then obviously, you've young Rory Canavan making the breakthrough as well. So I fancy Tyrone, but don't worry, Monaghan fans. We will get onto you a little bit later because I still think Monaghan are going to have a good season this year. So semi-finals time, it would be Down versus Armagh, and it would be Tyrone versus Derry, according to my predictions. Tasty ones. We'll go with Armagh to beat Down. I think Armagh will be too strong there. And I think Derry and Tyrone, I think these are the two best teams in the province, in my opinion. I think these two are the best two sides in the province, and two of the best sides in the country as well. It's an interesting one because Derry, like in these kind of provincial games, not entirely sure actually where the game will be played, but Derry are very well suited to these type of games. They really are, and you could see them frustrating the life out of Tyrone. Men behind the ball, a bit of an ambush like last year. But what actually swings me to go with Tyrone is the fact that Tyrone have been playing at a higher standard in Division 1 this year, and I think that will benefit them hugely. I think they've had much more bigger games to come through as opposed to Derry. I did think that last year, and it didn't matter in the end. Derry still beat them. But I think that could be a big difference. And also, Chrissy McCaig, injured, might be back by this game. We'll see what's going on with Conor Glass as well. He could possibly be injured. I thought Derry did not look the same team when he went off injured. So I'm going to go with Tyrone to cause... Is it a surprise? Is it a shock? I'm not entirely sure if it is, but I fancy them to turn over Derry. I just think they'll be up for this one. They surely will be after what happened last year. And I'll give them the edge to beat Derry. And then the final, according to my prediction, would be Tyrone versus Armagh, which would be, an absolute humdinger of a game. Two big rivals, another chapter in the rivalry. Armagh finally broken their voodoo and getting to an Ulster final, but it would be Tyrone. I think Armagh are getting to the Ulster final because of how the draw is. I think if Monaghan were on this side of the draw, they'd reach an Ulster final. I think Fermanagh would even have a shout, to be honest with you. So I think, I think it will be Tyrone. 4 or 5 points I'd probably go with. I think Armagh will get better the more the championship goes on, and confidence will be built up by here, and we might start to see the best out of them. But I would go with Tyrone by the smallest of margins. So, well, I suppose that is my predictions for the provincial championship. So we're going to go with Dublin to win Leinster, Kerry to win Munster, Mayo to win Connacht, and Tyrone to win Ulster. I think that's a fairly obvious predictions, really. There's probably nothing too left field there. And who knows, come Sunday evening, these predictions could go completely out the window if Roscommon beat Mayo. But there we go. Tom says Tyrone for Ulster. Definitely have a serious shout. Meadman says, yeah, but Derry almost lost to Louth, and Drew with Cork. Everyone seems to forget that. TJ says Derry have beaten Tyrone by 11 and 12 points in the last two meetings. One bad half against Dublin doesn't stop them from being Ulster favourites right now. Derry would rather play them than Monaghan. It's an interesting point, all right. Like, obviously, one of those games was the McKenna Cup, wasn't it? Can you read too much into that? I'm not, I don't know if you can, to be honest with you. Like, it is pre-season. Like, Longford won the O'Byrne Cup, and look at them. Like, so it's hard to know. Like, I certainly wouldn't put it past Derry, to be honest with you, to beat Tyrone. But I just think Tyrone, at this moment in time, I think have a bit more. And I know, like, I'm not even looking at it from the Derry game against Dublin. I think, the fact that Derry they'll be playing in a provincial ground, like, I'm not too sure where this will be. Maybe a neutral stadium. Maybe it might be in the Athletic grounds or something like that. I don't really know. And I think that suits Derry. I think that suits them down to the ground. I think Croke Park would much more suit Tyrone. But I just fancy Tyrone to pip them, in my opinion. Gunn says Down could definitely beat Donegal. Where is the Connacht final going to be played? Not entirely sure, actually, to be honest with you. Not entirely sure. I think they do a home and away rule. So the last time Mayo played Leitrim, I think it was in Leitrim, wasn't it? So I think it might be in Castlebar, according to my prediction. Now, obviously, it depends on what way things go. But there we go. Well, I suppose we'll run into the group stages then. And as I said, I did a bit of a mock draw when I was pre-recording this video a couple of days ago. And yeah, just for the crack, because you know, it'd be very easy for me to say right now XYZ will win the All-Ireland, but do you know what the thing is, when we look at games and we look at who might be playing who, that's when things actually get interesting. And that's where apologies there, folks. I don't know what happened there. I think maybe some opposition fans trying to hack into the stream to bring it down. No, all jokes aside, few internet difficulties there. So we're going off the L hotspot on my phone for the moment anyway, and hopefully my internet turns back on quickly enough. But anyway, let's move on. We were about to discuss the group stage draw. And we were going to discuss how things go there. So as I said, did a bit of a mock draw, obviously not a real draw. This is what we came up with. And I had to redo this draw a couple of times to make sure that all looked okay. Just There we go. There we go. I think we're back now, and we should be all good. This is what happens sometimes when you go live. I've actually never had this happen before, to be fair. So there we go. But anyway, this was the draw that I came up with. So as I was saying, just went on a random website, put the draw together. So as we said, according to my prediction, the pot one teams would be the teams at the top there, which would obviously be Kerry, Mayo, Dublin, and Tyrone. And then the pot two teams would be the sides who lose the provincial finals, and that would be Leitrim, Louth, Armagh, and Cork. And then the pot three sides would be the sides based off the next best four rankings in the National Football League. So no particular order: Monaghan, Derry, Galway, and Roscommon. Obviously, Derry were promoted from Division 2. Donegal were relegated, so that's why Derry get the jump there. And then pot four sides would be Westmeath, Kildare, Donegal, and Meath. Now, I'm not entirely sure what pot Westmeath are actually going to be in, if I'm perfectly honest, but for the sake of the video, we've put them in pot four, and we did a bit of randomization to see what groups we would come up with. And this is what we got. So Group A was Kerry, Leitrim, Monaghan, and Westmeath. Group B was Mayo, Louth, Derry, and Kildare. Group C was Dublin, Armagh, Galway, and Donegal. A bit of a group of death. Group D was Tyrone, Cork, Roscommon, and Meath. And if these groups are real, I think my prediction would certainly be Kerry to top Group A. I think that goes without saying. I think I'll go with Monaghan to finish second. And between Leitrim and Westmeath, like Leitrim would actually look at that and think is the gap between Leitrim and Westmeath that big? Probably not, on the basis of how we've seen things in the league. But I would go with Westmeath to finish in third. Group B, do you know what? I'd actually go for Derry to finish in first. I think Derry would have a couple of players back from injury at this point. I think Mayo will have come through a number of intense games, such as the Connacht Championship and much more. I would fancy Derry to come out on top and actually finish in first. Now, the pot one sides do get 2 home games, so that could definitely favour Mayo, but I'm going to go for Derry to upset the odds a little bit and finish in first. We would then go Mayo in second, and I think Louth would have the jump on Kildare as well. Group C, as I was saying, is definitely a very tasty group, and as a Dublin fan, that's when I definitely didn't make this draw to suit my own county, because this would be very difficult in fairness. And I'd go for Galway to finish in first. I just think they're a bit ahead of everyone else, and I think they'd probably turn us over in Croke Park maybe as well. That would be a big statement, actually, if Galway were to do that, in fairness. But I'd go Galway first, Dublin second, and Armagh third. I don't think Donegal are going to get anything from this one. And Group D is fairly wide open as well. I'd go with Roscommon to finish first and maybe upset the odds. Again, Tyrone coming through a lot of big Ulster games. I just don't think the jeopardy is really here in this group. Like finishing first gets you straight through to a quarter-final. Finishing second makes you avoid the third place teams, and I think gives you home advantage as well. But I'm not entirely sure if there's a huge amount of jeopardy there. So I'll go with Roscommon to finish first. They beat Tyrone earlier in the league, so why can't they not do it again? Tyrone second, and we'll go with Cork in third. I don't think Meath would have much of a chance there. We did another draw then for the qualifiers, and this is what we came up with. So Dublin versus Westmeath, Monaghan versus Cork, Mayo versus Armagh, and Tyrone versus Louth. Obviously, the second place teams against the third place teams. I'm not entirely sure if these will be played at a neutral venue or what's going to happen. I think a neutral venue would probably be fair, but then again, you'd probably want to reward the second place team. So Dublin versus Westmeath is kind of a fascinating one, but you would go with Dublin there, and I think you'd go with Monaghan to beat Cork as well. Mayo versus Armagh. Mayo have definitely got the most difficult of the draws there, but I would go with Mayo to come through that one. And Tyrone versus Louth would be Mickey Hart going up against his former side, and that would certainly make for a bit of a story. But yeah, we'll go with Tyrone. So after all that, all the second place teams go through anyways. So there you go. The quarterfinals looks like this then. As I said, I did a quick randomization for this one as well, and obviously keeping the group winners away from the second place teams. And it's a bit confusing because normally it'd be the provincial winners, who would be seeded at this point, when that's actually not the case. So Roscommon versus Dublin, do you know what? Like Roscommon would certainly ruffle Dublin's feathers in an All-Ireland quarter-final. You look at Roscommon in the league, you look at Dublin in the league, some would maybe even back Roscommon, but I think from a Dublin perspective, we should have enough. And I think we would, the likes of Mannion would be kicking into gear at this point. We should have enough there. Kerry versus Mayo, we're going to leave that one and get back to that one in a second. But Galway versus Tyrone, that is an extremely, extremely tasty one. An extremely tasty one if it did come about. Very, very hard. Very, very hard to call, to be honest. But yeah, I'd probably lean towards Tyrone, to be honest with you. Just to do a number on Galway. I just think Tyrone are just that little bit better. I think it would be a game that could be a bit like the Armagh Galway game last year. Extra time penalties, but we'll go with Tyrone by the smallest of margins. And we'll go with Derry to narrowly beat Monaghan as well. Kerry versus Mayo then. So, this is the part where I think the All-Ireland champions run will be over. I do fancy Mayo to get the better of Kerry. And the main reason being is I think when you look through the history books at All-Ireland winners, only twice as a team successfully defended their All-Ireland title since the turn of the century. And that was Kerry in, I think, 2008 and 2009. And obviously Dublin 6 in a row. It very rarely happens that a team goes on and dominates the All-Ireland scene straight away. And I just think for Kerry, defensively, there's been a few vulnerabilities in there. I know people say they don't have their best team playing week in, week out, but I think aside from Clifford and Sean O'Shea, like the other players haven't really stood up. And that's why I fancy Mayo to beat them. I really, really do. I just think Mayo will be stronger, quicker, faster. And I think they'll have what it takes to turn over Kerry and Croke Park and get themselves into an All-Ireland semi-final. I mean, it's one of those games that if it comes around, we preview it in more detail. How would Mayo deal with Sean O'Shea, or sorry, David Clifford, well, and Sean O'Shea, to be fair. How would Kerry deal with Aidan O'Shea? A lot of formalities there, but I would go with Mayo to turn over Kerry and end the All-Ireland champions reign. Still think Kerry have a lot of potential in their squad and still think they'll come back stronger next year and probably go on to dominate at some point. But I just think when you look through the history books, winning back-to-back All-Irelands, it very rarely happens. Very, very rarely happens. Even through the 90s as well. You know, when you look through it, it hasn't happened too often. So to be honest with you, I fancy Mayo to get the breakthrough. And look, they are All-Ireland champions, and I'm sure they'll come back stronger. And look, you certainly couldn't rule them out, but I just think Mayo have a bit more about them at this moment in time. So we'll move on to the semi-finals then, and this is what came up. So it was Dublin versus Mayo, Derry versus Tyrone, and as we know, or for those of you who don't know, with the All-Ireland Championship this year, it is going to be Leinster versus Connacht, and it is going to be Ulster versus Munster. Now, obviously, I don't have a Munster team in here, and with the fact that there's group stages and everything else, it could confuse things a little bit, but Dublin versus Mayo, Derry versus Tyrone are the two All-Ireland semi-finals. And I tell you what, even as a Dublin fan, the thought of playing Mayo, what an occasion this would be. Repeat, obviously, of the 2021 All-Ireland semi-final. And this is a difficult one to predict, to be honest, because obviously as a Dublin fan, my heart says Dublin. I would want to go with Dublin as much as anything here. And certainly when this game comes around, if this game does come around, 100% I'll obviously back Dublin. But when I'm making these predictions videos, I'm doing it off what I think will happen, and I'm trying to be as objective as possible. Like if I just predicted what I wanted to happen, then I'd just predict Dublin to win everything, wouldn't I? And it would just be boring then because it wouldn't be authentic or real. But I would have to go with Mayo. I would just have to go with Mayo, unfortunately. Pains me to say it. I don't want to say it, but I just don't. I just think I look at two sides. I look at one team who are coming into their prime. Ryan O'Donoghue, Tommy Conroy, two players coming into their prime. Jeremy O'Connor in midfield, outstanding. Conor Loftus now playing at centre-back. In goal, they seem to have found an upgrade for Robbie Henley and Colm Reap. Defensively looking very, very strong. I just think there'd be two, and I look at Dublin and I see a side that are slowly coming to the end of their time, if we're being honest. Like Mick Fitzsimons, James McCarthy, lads that are getting on a bit. I know Kieran Kilkenny, Conor O'Callaghan, Paul Mannion, still young enough players and still got a lot of engine left in the tank. Jack McCaffrey as well, in fairness. But I just fancy Mayo by the smallest of margins. And I think it could be one that goes to extra time, possibly even more. But yeah, I think I would just back Mayo. I think I would just back them. And, as I said, pains me to say it, but that is just what I would predict. The other semi-final would be Derry and Tyrone, and it would obviously be a repeat of the Ulster semi-final as well from my predictions. Derry back in another All-Ireland semi-final, but I think I would go with Tyrone for this one, in my opinion, if obviously this did happen. I think with it being in Croke Park, I think it would suit Tyrone. Let's not forget, Derry have gone full strength nearly every game this year, other than the Cork game. And I think injuries could pile up. It could just go against them a little bit by the time this game comes around. And obviously, when you look at Derry's record in Croke Park and big games, like the game against Dublin and Galway in particular, stand out. It wasn't great. And that's why I would back Tyrone to come through and reach the All-Ireland final. And you know what that would leave? A repeat of the 2021 All-Ireland final. And this would be extremely, extremely tasty indeed. Let's have a look there. Mikey says, I thought it was Leinster versus Ulster and Connacht versus Munster. I think it's Leinster versus Connacht because of the fact that I think it was. So if we go back, 2020 was obviously Leinster versus Ulster. 2021 was Leinster versus Connacht. You might actually be right. To be honest with you, but we'll stick with what we have for now, to be fair. Tom says Mayo for Sam. Galway Mayo All Ireland final. It could happen. Where would you rank Paul Mannion in terms of best forwards in the country? I think he's definitely up there, but I think we need to see him play. I think we need to see him play. In my opinion, we need to see him play quite regularly. Come back into the Dublin side and see him play in big games. But for Kilmacud Crokes, he's been outstanding the last couple of seasons. So Mayo versus Tyrone then in the All-Ireland final is what we would end up with. And to be fair, do you know what? Even if it was Leinster versus Ulster, so that would be Dublin versus Tyrone, I guess, and it would be Derry versus Mayo. I think I'd still go for the same outcome. Still think Tyrone would narrowly beat Dublin, and I think Mayo would be too strong for Derry. So I think we end up with the same outcome anyways. But yeah, and I mean, obviously you think of when these two played each other 2 years ago, everyone fancied Mayo very much going into it. I remember I actually predicted Tyrone, in fairness. But I think it's going to happen. I think Mayo are going to win the All-Ireland. I really do. I think, in terms of the squad, the players, the ability that they have, the depth of options. Because in this game as well, if this was the All-Ireland final, you'd look at last 10, 15 minutes, what players could Mayo bring on? They could probably bring on Cillian O'Connor, Kevin McLaughlin, depending on how they would start, maybe you could bring on a Fionn McDonough, maybe you could bring on the likes of Aidan Orme or someone like that who could change the game. You're talking about top class players who can come on, make a difference, make an impact. And I think that's what Mayo have over Tyrone. Like Tyrone's options off the bench would be Rory Canavan. And I can't, is there much more else there? I'm not entirely sure. So that's why I would fancy Mayo to do it. I would fancy them to do it and to win the All-Ireland Senior Football Championship for the first time since 1951. And I think management-wise as well, I think Kevin McStay, I think they have the best, one of the best managers, I think, up there with Rory Gallagher. And he'd obviously have to go and do it, of course, to actually prove himself as the best manager. But I think when you look at some of the tactical changes he could make, and even like that as well, like Mayo have this doggedness now about them, like even against Tyrone, to fight their way through games and get over the line. I suppose the only thing that would worry me from a Mayo perspective is obviously, that All-Ireland final curse, as they say. I think the curse might be gone now, but the fact they have lost so many finals, there'd be so much baggage, there'd be so much expectation, and I think it has, that has played a part, in the past. But I think this Mayo side, they just have they're in their prime now. And I think they would have enough to come through it. I really, really do. But look, I could be wrong. And if I am wrong, I will certainly hold my hands up and explain why. But yeah, that is how I see it. I see Mayo doing it. I see Mayo winning the All-Ireland. John Fury says Mayo still lacking 2 top-class forwards to win, Sam. Good to see Big John Fury on the stream. Yeah, I wouldn't say so though. Like I think, like when you look at it, Ryan O'Donoghue, Tommy Conroy, like injuries could catch them, and injuries has probably cost Mayo in the past, and that could be an issue. So I think, yeah, I would with those forwards, Aidan O'Shea as well, who's looked in brilliant form. Jordan Flynn, in that half forward line's outstanding. Fionn McDonough as well. So I think they'll do it. And I even made a video earlier in the year as well talking about why Mayo would win an All-Ireland under Kevin McStay. So this even hasn't been a new thing or something I've kind of gone mad. But yeah, there we go. Darts Mania says, as a Dublin fan, I always said if Dublin get knocked out I want Mayo to win the All-Ireland. To be honest with you, I definitely don't want them to win it. You know, I'd probably actually cheer for Tyrone in this final, in fairness. You know, there is a rivalry there between Dublin and Mayo, but if I'm looking at it objectively from right now, as in 7th of April, 2023, Good Friday, I would back Mayo. I would back Mayo. But obviously, as the season goes on, things can change. You know, opinions can change. But at this moment in time, that's what I would go with. But there we go. We'll just run through some general things like Footballer of the Year and Player of the Year and everything else. So we will share the screen once again. And this was a good tweet from obviously the GA Statsman himself, as we very well know, who's been on this channel a couple of times. So I've already tweeted this on my own Twitter, so some people might have seen it already. But winners, as I said, I think Mayo will win the All-Ireland. Finalists will be Tyrone, Munster, Kerry, Leinster, Dublin, Connacht, Mayo, Ulster, Tyrone. Top scorer, I think, will be Ryan O'Donoghue. You know, he's on the freeze a lot of the time as well, and you need to think about it strategically. So I would say Ryan O'Donoghue will win that one. Dark horse, I think, is between Monaghan and Roscommon. You know, Monaghan could beat Derry. They could. You know, it's definitely not inconceivable in Croke Park as well. So Monaghan definitely a bit of a dark horse in my opinion, and I think Roscommon as well. With a bit more luck, you know, with a better draw than what has happened in my draw, I think you know they could go on a bit of a run. Tailteann Cup, we will do a predictions for that when we know for certain who is in the Tailteann Cup. But at this moment in time, I would say Clare. Mikey says here, I'd give Longford an outside chance to get a Tailteann Cup semi-final. They could take out one of the big teams at home. They could do. They're certainly a lot better than how they finish in Division 3. I think they are a Division 3 team, and I think they will come back up next season. Footballer of the Year. I suppose maybe a bit of a left field one, but the man I actually think will win Footballer of the Year is Diarmuid O'Connor, because I think he's been sensational for Mayo so far this year. You look at those 2 blocks he got in against Galway, the work he does around midfield, and he's so critical in big games as well. You think back to you know, that Dublin game a couple of years ago, like he changed that game. He changed that game with that flick, and his performance as well was brilliant. So I would go with Diarmuid O'Connor to be the man to win Footballer of the Year. Might be a bit of a left field one. I know most people would go with David Clifford or, you know, but obviously I'm looking at it on the basis of how I've predicted the All-Ireland as well. You know, according to my prediction, Kerry will get beaten in All-Ireland quarter-final. So it's rare that you give Footballer of the Year to someone who gets beat in an All-Ireland quarter-final. But that is how I see it. But there we go. I don't know what is happening with this stream, but I don't know. Maybe it's Galway or Dublin fans, the fact that I've predicted Mayo to win the All-Ireland. Maybe it's the curse. I really don't know what is going on, but there we go. So yeah, where were we? Young Footballer of the Year. I think I'll go with Jack Carney. I did say on Twitter that I'd fancy Tommy Conroy. But the issue I've got there is that I think Tommy Conroy, I think he's actually too old, to be fair, to win this. So we'll go with Jack Carney. I think he looked very good against Galway. I think he looks very, very impressive in my opinion. So we'll go with him to get the job done. But yeah, so there we go. That makes that wraps up the predictions. That wraps everything up. Obviously, this predictions video a little bit different, doing it live, more so because the championship is happening tomorrow, and yeah, you know, week's break makes things very, very hard to pre-record, edit the video, everything else. So maybe a little bit different than usual. But as I was saying, I think Mayo will do it. I think they will win the All-Ireland Senior Football Championship. I hope I'm wrong. I hope Dublin win it. Of course I do. You know, but that's how I see it at this moment in time. And maybe there might be an element of recency bias, seeing how good Mayo have done in the league. But, you know, when you actually look through the history books, a lot of the time, the team that wins the league actually goes on to win the All-Ireland. Like, happened last year with Kerry, happened multiple times with Dublin when they won the league. So I fancy them to do it. But, again, we'll see what happens with certain draws, group stages. And if Mayo get beat by Roscommon on Sunday, then all of a sudden, things could completely change, and I will throw this video right out the window. But then again, How many times have you seen Mayo bounce back, in fairness? But there we go. But there we are. There we are. We'll wrap this up here. Leave a like, subscribe. We'll be going live at the weekend for a watch along for Mayo versus Roscommon. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And plenty more reactions as well. Be watching the Armagh versus Antrim game, and probably watch the Leitrim versus New York game as well, albeit a bit of late Saturday night entertainment on 11 o'clock. So there we go. Yeah, cheers anyone who tuned in. Smash the like button, subscribe. Let me know in the comments down below what are your predictions. As I said, fancy Mayo to beat Tyrone in the All-Ireland final. We'll see what happens come July, but they're my predictions. So, yeah, cheers anyone who tuned in, and I'll see you all later.